Thank you. That was quite the introduction. I feel like I should tell you this story. So my full name is Liz Forkin Bohannon. Forkin is the name that I grew up with. And has anybody in here seen The Good Place? Okay, I haven't. But I get that the general premise is like they're in heaven, and so they're not allowed to cuss. So instead of the F word, they say Forkin. So I posted a photo a couple months ago of my book that just launched, and it has my name on the cover, Liz Forkin Bohannon. And I had so many people message me and be like, wait, that's your real name? So now I feel like when people introduce me, they should just be like, Liz Forkin Bohannon. So that's a little bit about me. My name is Liz Forkin Bohannon, and I am the co-founder and co-CEO of an ethical fashion brand called Sseko Designs. About 5 years ago, I found myself, as one does, in an Ethiopian shoe factory. And in this shoe factory, I spent most of my time in this back room that was generously referred to as the design lab. It was like a little 8x8 room, windowless room, and back there I would meet with the lead producer, and we would kind of tinker and work on different designs. And every day at this factory, the bell rings at noon, and that means that it's time to go to lunch. So everybody in the factory gets up, and we go have lunch in the cantina, and we play bottle cap checkers and drink some buna, which is delicious Ethiopian coffee. And on this particular day, the bell rang at noon, and I was working on a particularly challenging shoe product. And I had a deadline coming up, and so I was like, I don't have time to go to lunch. I'm just going to work through lunch. So I'm like working away. I totally lose track of time when all of a sudden, just the power goes out, and it's completely pitch black in the factory. But in addition to being completely pitch black, it's also totally silent. So, I grew up in the 90s, read Left Behind series. Obviously, my first thought is like, the rapture, like that happened. My Ethiopian friends clearly had a good thing going on with Jesus, and I've been left behind. And then my second, more accurate thought is, oh my gosh. It's Saturday, and on Saturdays, we only work a half day at this factory. So when that bell rings at noon, it's not so that we can all go to lunch. It's so that everybody can go home for the entire rest of the weekend. And I had this realization that I had gone and gotten myself locked in an Ethiopian shoe factory for the next 2 nights. So I make my way to the front. This guy in the front, he goes, oh, no. That was great. I'm going to just keep looking at you for the rest of the talk. Every speaker wants you in the audience. That was so good. So I make my way to the front of the factory where, indeed, my worst suspicions are confirmed. These giant steel doors had been padlocked shut from the outside, and I was locked in. So I'm starting to panic, obviously, and I hear these 2 voices in the distance, really kind of quiet and far away. And I pick up a shoe last, which luckily for me is really hard and heavy, and I start banging this shoe last up against these steel doors, making as much noise as possible, and I'm screaming the only Amharic word that is coming to me in my panic, which is salam, which quite literally translates to, may the peace of God be with you. So here I am just screaming, may the peace of God be with you! And the voices get louder and louder, and it turns out that it's these 2 little old Ethiopian ladies who are like the secretaries that sit at the front desk. And they explain to me through this crack in this steel door and through their Amharic, I have really bad Amharic and their limited English, that unfortunately, like the one guy that has the key to the factory went home like 3 hours ago. So you guys, it was probably, I don't even know, a 3 or 4 hour long ordeal. These sweet women stayed with me on the other side of that gate until the guy finally got back, and I was rescued, and this was the celebration that ensued. And wait for it, and booty slap. About 5 years prior to getting myself locked in this shoe factory, I had made a pair of these funky, strappy sandals with interchangeable fabric laces that can be tied and styled in a bunch of different ways. I was not a designer. I was not interested in fashion, but I had this idea for these sandals when I was in college, and I had the very brilliant philosophical thought that I would love a pair of flip-flops that don't flop. And this was them. Not only did I not consider myself a designer, I was not even remotely interested in fashion, as evidenced by this photo that perhaps against my better judgment I'm getting ready to share with you. You guys, this picture was taken of me not like right after I emerged from my bedroom after like a violent stomach flu, which is like what this kind of look says to me. No. This photo was taken of me on the day I got engaged. This was the best that I could do. Okay, so nevertheless, for reasons we will get to later, I had designed these sandals and set up this rudimentary manufacturing process, and I started selling these sandals out of the back of my car. Literally, this photo was taken of me on the side of Highway 1, right outside of LA. I was on my way to an event in the very early days of our business when I just got stuck in this terrible, terrible gridlock, standstill traffic in LA, when it dawned on me that, like, I have several hundred pairs of sandals I need to sell and a really captive audience in gridlock. And so got out of my car and just started knocking on car windows and selling sandals for the low, low price of whatever cash they happened to have on hand. But somehow it actually worked. We spent the next several years building out a best-in-class, vertically integrated manufacturing sandal company in Uganda, and then we spent so much time and energy traveling across the country trying to find wholesalers, retailers that would carry the products. At this point in the story, we probably had 500 accounts that were selling the product, but we realized that if we wanted to keep growing, we were going to need to innovate. So we had this one product, these strappy ribbon sandals, that had taken us further than we could have possibly imagined, and we had this network of stores across the country. But we saw the future of brick and mortar retail, because every month, these stores that had been in business for 15, 20 years were closing their doors for good. And we realized that for retail to survive the e-commerce revolution that was happening, it either needs to be a race to the bottom, so super cheap and really convenient, or it needs to be really unique and experiential and social. So we started dreaming about what it would look like to use our mission of creating community and opportunity for women globally with women right here at home. We started thinking about, well, what would it look like, instead of doing traditional retail, to put our products and our brand and our impact into the hands of women here in the United States who want to use their gifts and their skills and their passion to make a positive impact in the world, but who, like many of us, feel super overwhelmed with how to do that and where to start. But to make this shift from this kind of traditional wholesale retail model to a direct model was an immense, immense risk. We had spent 5-6 years building up this retail network that now represented over 75% of our revenue. And we knew that if we were going to pivot and shift, that we would find ourselves literally the next day in an entirely new industry. We would need a new financing model, we would need a new team, and we would definitely need to build out our product catalog in order to support that shift. So here I was trying to design and prototype shoes, and literally still didn't have any background or formal experience in that, getting myself locked in these Ethiopian shoe factories. And while, it makes for a story I won't forget, and I was scared of spending 2 nights in a factory, what I was really, really scared of was of failing. I realized that during this time in my career, particularly, I was waking up every day really, really afraid. I was afraid that if we took this risk, if we pivoted and we evolved, but then we failed, that everybody around me would look at me and say, "See, it was just beginner's luck." Those sandals that she designed, that wholesale business that she built, it was all just beginner's luck. So beginner's luck refers to this supposed phenomenon of novices experiencing success. And this phrase really, really started to haunt me. In my most fearful moments, I would just picture myself in the crowd of people just saying, "See, it was just beginner's luck." Well, I don't want to spoil the story, but we ended up doing it. We pulled our products off of store shelves, and we ended up putting them into the hands of women all across the country. A mom of 4 from rural Indiana, a social justice researcher and educator from Michigan, a foster mom and photographer from Texas. And these few dozen women, in their first full year of selling the product and sharing the brand story and earning an income, generated more in revenue and impact than we had ever done as a wholesale business. We realized that all along, our company was created to create opportunity and community, not just for women across the globe, but for women right here at home. But throughout my career, nearly every single time I find myself in this place, where I can either pivot and evolve and take a risk, soon to follow is this nasty little insecurity that says, yeah, but if you try and fail, they'll know you've just been faking it all along. Everyone will know it was just beginner's luck. So a few years ago, I really started diving into this insecurity and thinking about where it came from, and more importantly, probably thinking about a time in my life and my career before this specific insecurity emerged. And I had to go pretty far back, all the way back to my 22-year-old self who had quit my corporate job and moved to Uganda with a journalism degree and no job and no plan. Just this belief that I could be a part of this story that was bigger than myself. This willingness to ask interesting questions and follow leads and be really open to where it took me. And I started wondering if all of the success, and by the way, not without plenty of failures along the way. You guys know those shoes that I was working on in Ethiopia. I spent 2 years on that product, and when it finally launched, it failed so miserably that I may have buried a pair of those shoes in my backyard and performed a bad ideas funeral, because I do believe that even our bad ideas deserve the dignity of being laid properly to rest. You may think I'm kidding, but this is what a bad ideas funeral looks like, in case you're curious. But I started wondering if the success that I did have had less to do with beginner's luck and everything to do with a little something I like to call beginner's pluck. Now, I'm not referring to the verb pluck, which is what you do to that chin hair when you think no one is watching. I'm talking about the noun. It's so brilliant and underused. The noun pluck means spirited and determined courage. I started thinking that maybe my younger self didn't succeed despite my lack of experience, my lack of industry connections, my lack of know-how or expertise, but perhaps precisely because of it. I started thinking about the mentalities and the mindsets that I had during my earliest days, dreaming about, envisioning, and launching Sseko long before I would have self-identified as an entrepreneur or a business leader or a designer. And I started wondering if now, 7, 8 years into running this company that has millions of dollars in annual revenue and investors and shareholders and employees on multiple continents, if learning how to intentionally channel my inner beginner could help me become a more effective and creative and courageous leader for the long haul. Okay, I want to talk about the 4 stages of learning. It's possible, likely, that you've all heard about the 4 stages of learning, and if so, you've probably seen something like this to illustrate it. Okay, so stage 1 of learning is this stage of unconscious incompetence. Okay, I have a 3-year-old son, and he is living his best life in stage 1 of unconscious incompetence. Just like kind of happy-go-lucky, you don't know what you don't know. And then you have this moment, right? You get into the dream school, you get a promotion, you launch the company, you raise your hand and you ask for more responsibility, and you have this moment where you realize, oh my gosh, there is a lot that I don't know. You become conscious of your incompetence. Now, stage 2 of the learning journey is absolutely the worst. We hate this stage. This is when we are most insecure and when our egos are really super fragile. And when the best advice we seem to get from all of the experts is basically like, fake it till you make it, like get through it as fast and as painless as possible and keep practicing, and eventually you will emerge into stage 3, which is conscious competence. So this is when we're like, okay, I've done it a few times, I've kind of got this under my belt, I'm figuring it out. It still takes a lot of mental energy, but I can do it. But just keep practicing. Like, stay at it, because practice makes perfect. And eventually, if you just keep going, you will emerge into the golden state of unconscious competence. I gave a talk last week and that went off like 30 seconds into my talk. And it was amazing. I was like, oh, well, clearly the Spirit of God is with us. From this stage, like we finally get to be the leaders and the mentors and the influencers that we always dreamed of being, right? Wrong. What I want you to realize is that this image of the stage of learning is actually not only incorrect, it's really toxic. And if you believe in this image of the stages of learning, you will actually start to act out of fear. And you will stop taking risks, and you will stop iterating, and you will stop evolving, because those feelings that you felt down there in the land of conscious incompetence, they actually become even scarier, because they become a sign that you got knocked down a few notches. Or perhaps even worse, it's proof that you were actually stuck down there in the land of conscious incompetence all along, and you just happened to be able to convince enough people that you were further along than you actually were, and now you're going to get found out. What is so important for us to understand as leaders and as entrepreneurs is that the cycle of the stages of learning are actually a cycle, and that the most courageous and innovative and creative leaders, they don't just celebrate when they reach mastery or expertise. They actually celebrate when they find themselves back in the land of conscious incompetence. Because that means to them that in addition to reaching mastery and expertise, they did the thing that only real leaders and visionaries and creatives do. When they reached mastery and expertise, instead of staying there and getting really comfortable and protecting your ego and identity, they voluntarily dove out of that stage and back into the cycle of learning, or what I like to call the magical stage of beginners. Okay, so in my book, Beginner's Pluck, I tell my story of launching and growing Sseko Designs, and I share the 14 principles that make up this mentality and spirit of Beginner's Pluck. And by learning and living into these principles, you will become a more effective and innovative leader for the long haul. And those feelings that used to ignite your imposter syndrome and your fragile ego and your insecurities are going to become the very things that make you say, honey, I'm home, back in the magical land of beginners. Now, I want to warn you that the principles of Beginner's Pluck are, they're really feel good. They're really inspiring, and you're just going to want to like read them in the morning and really let them sink in. We're going to talk about things like how important it is that we dream small. That we start by dreaming small. Okay, but next, I'm going to tell you that it is so worth it for you to go out there and do everything that you can. Here we go. Actually, I'm going to tell you that, sorry, but you're probably never going to find your passion. It's really inspiring, I know, but the good news is you can build it. Okay, but this last one is obviously for real. The thing that I want you guys to take away, more than anything else, is that you are so incredibly average. I mean, just like statistically speaking, this is how statistics work. Most of us are kind of hanging out somewhere in the middle of the bell curve, right? But the good news is, what Pluckies know is that you don't actually have to be extraordinary or above average to live an extraordinary life of purpose and passion and impact. I'm still debating whether or not we put that message onto our fall collection, our t-shirts. But the thing is I think most of the principles of Beginner's Pluck are going to surprise you, because here's what I've learned over the last 10 years of running this company and attempting to build this life and business of purpose and passion and impact, and now teaching and coaching and training thousands of entrepreneurs to do the same. This narrative that we're getting in current culture about going out and finding your passion, and once you do, you'll never work another day in your life, and how like you're so special. You just have to find it and release it into the world. Like, those messages not only aren't helping us, they're actually hurting us. And they're creating a lot of fear and anxiety and serious analysis paralysis. Okay, so let's start with this culprit. You guys know you cannot open up Instagram, you cannot walk down the self-help aisle without some inspirational guru shouting this at you, right? Like, dream big, come on, dream big. And here's the thing. If you've known me for more than like 10 seconds, you know that I love a good big dream. But here's the problem. I have met far too many people who are like, yeah, obviously I want to dream big, but like how? How do I get the big dream in the first place? Or perhaps even worse, they have a dream, but they're paralyzed, kind of asking like, I don't know, is it good enough? Is it big enough? So principle of beginner's pluck. One of the first principles of beginner's pluck is that we actually start by dreaming small. When I get introduced to give a speech or on a podcast or something, it's not uncommon to have somebody describe me as like this big dreamer, right? I took this big risk and I moved to Uganda and I started this company. And while it's like really nice for my ego and it's fun to be seen as somebody that like easily dreams these big dreams and then executes on them, I want to tell you the real story about how this actually went down. So when I was in college, I was interested in issues that were facing women and girls living in extreme poverty and conflict and post-conflict zones. I graduated from college and I, stayed passionate about this issue. I ended up getting my master's degree and I took these classes and I wrote papers and, I marched in protests. And then when I graduated from grad school, I went and got a job at a corporate communications firm that I wasn't super jazzed about, but it was okay because I had this really, really big dream. This huge dream that involved this corporate philanthropy scheme that was gonna involve millions of dollars and was gonna bring millions of women and girls out of poverty. And every day at my job, I would, sit and I would think about this big dream, but I was like, okay, obviously, like, I need a different job, I need a promotion, I need more money, I need more power. So I would just kind of, wait and just keep dreaming and keep dreaming. But every day that I was kind of dreaming and thinking about this idea, but I wasn't actually doing anything, this dream became more and more elusive. It kind of felt more and more impossible and like the kind of silly, idealistic remnants of this like passionate grad student. So when I was sitting in my first job, I had this moment, and I won't get into the details here, but I had this incredibly powerful moment where I realized that here I said I was this really passionate person who really cared deeply about this huge global issue. And the reality is, I did not know a single woman who grew up living in extreme poverty or conflict. I realized that there was this huge delta between what I said I cared about and just the actual day-to-day, everyday life that I was building. I realized that in the midst of being like super passionate and loud about wanting to make an impact for 1 million girls across the globe, that the sacred value and importance of just one got lost somewhere along the way. So I'm sitting there at my desk, and I've got tears running down my face because I realize that there's this really big delta between what I say I care about and my actual life. And in that moment, everything changed. My new dream actually became microscopically small. This big, huge dream that I had for like millions of women and girls just got so shrunk down, and all of a sudden my new microscopically small dream became make one friend, know one girl, be in relationship with one person who has been unfairly asked to shoulder some of the biggest burdens in the world. And I put my 2 weeks in, I quit my corporate job, and I bought a one-way plane ticket to Uganda. You can imagine when my parents are like, okay, you quit your first full-time job a whopping 3 months in. Talk about that for grit. They're like, and you're moving to Uganda. And just to be very clear, like, I did not grow up traveling. Like, we vacationed in Destin, Florida, and like only places our minivan would take us. I'd never really left the United States of America before. My parents were like, oh, cool, so you're moving to Uganda? Like, why? What are you doing in Uganda? And I'm like, Mom and Dad, I'm going to make a friend. And they were like, couldn't you just like join a volleyball club like your sister? But here's the thing. In that moment, when my big dream became really, really, really small, I didn't need a budget. I didn't need permission. I didn't need the right person to tell me I could do it or that it was a great idea or a big budget. And when you remove all of those obstacles, you also remove all of your excuses. When I made that huge dream as small as it could possibly go, I actually became a doer instead of just a dreamer. Okay, so I show up in Uganda, very consciously incompetent, which in hindsight is the only way that you should ever show up to a new place or a new culture. And I met an incredible group of young women. Through my journey of just building relationships and friendship and community, I meet some of the top female scholars in the entire country. But these women test into college and can't afford to go. And they're going home for the 9-month gap between high school and university, looking for jobs to finance their university tuition, and two things are happening. One, they can't find jobs. They're from areas of the country where there's like an 80% youth unemployment rate, and any jobs that do exist kind of naturally default to the boys in the village. And then secondarily, there's this loss of social support. So these really, really bright young women have spent the last 2 years in this college prep program, all like living and working and studying together. And then they go back home to their villages where they might be the only women in their entire community that have made it this far in the education system. And there's a lot of social pressure through bride price and dowry to get married and to start having kids. So I decided to do something about it. I, as a good, American, thought, okay, well, we'll start a charity and some sort of nonprofit sponsorship program. And then, thankfully, was hanging out with some really, really smart Ugandans who kind of challenged me on that, and started realizing that, oh, wait, actually, the issues that we're facing here are a lot deeper. And the reality is, we need to be investing in marketplace solutions. We need to be creating jobs and contributing to infrastructure, because a lot of the problems that exist here that a ton of nonprofits and charities are trying to solve would actually be eliminated if we had a growing economy that could support students that were coming out of the school system. So I realized that we needed to start a company, and so I was like, what about a chicken farm? That feels good. My market research basically consisted of people seem to be pretty into chickens here. I don't know, I'm drinking tea in someone's living room and a chicken runs across. So I do that. That went about as well as you can imagine a chicken farm going from a woman who had to use Wikipedia to figure out what do chickens eat. To be fair, I don't think that they were much worse off with me than they were with this guy. That's 99 live chickens on the back of that motorcycle right there. It's really impressive. But my friend Molly from back home reminded me when I was okay, I'm thinking, what is something that we could do or make and where the economics make sense and it's actually possible? And she reminded me of those kind of ugly, strappy sandals that I had made in college. And at this point, honestly, I was just whatever. All of my ideas so far have failed. Sure, why not sandals? So I spent months traveling the country by motorcycle and finding materials and prototyping and designing and tweaking, and finally got it to a place where I went out to this school. And I asked the leaders of the school, I'm who are the brightest women? Who are the ones that are testing really well? They're getting into great colleges. They're getting into the program that they want. But based off of their family background, will have the hardest time actually making that happen. And the school came back, and they had chosen 3 young women, Mary, Mercy, and Rebecca. And I sat down with Mary, Mercy, and Rebecca, and I taught them how to make these sandals. And then I made a promise to them that would go on to change the entire trajectory of my life. I said, all right, if you make these sandals for the next 9 months, I promise that you will go to university in the fall. And they were okay. And I was okay. And moved back home and started selling these sandals out of the back of my car. About 4 days after I moved back to the United States, my now husband, Ben, proposes to me. This red carpet, star-studded event. He's literally down on his knees, you guys, asking me to marry him. And I'm sure saying something relatively nice and romantic. And I'm kind of panicking because I'm we weren't talking that regularly when I was in Uganda. The internet was really bad. I was do I tell him now that I promised 3 girls in Uganda that I would pay for them to go to college if this little sandal project doesn't work out? Do we have that conversation right now? Do I wait until after our bank accounts are joined? So obviously I waited until after. So about a year after we got married, my husband quit his full-time job. We sold everything that we owned, including the wedding presents that we had just gotten, to buy a Honda Element. And the only reason we bought a Honda Element, if you don't know what that is, it's literally like a toaster on wheels, was because it was big enough for him to sleep in the back while we also had our inventory of not just him, but he's taller than me. It wasn't like I was staying in a hotel and he was staying in the back of the car. So we started traveling the country, and we were hosting these trunk shows and trying to find retail partners. Fast forward almost 10 years later, and we are now one of the largest non-agricultural cultural exporters in the entire country of Uganda. We have an amazing, awesome, brilliant rock star team of all Ugandans that run the entire show over there. We have created opportunity for hundreds of female scholars in Uganda and now Ethiopia. We have expanded our product line. We're no longer just sandals, but apparel and footwear and jewelry and beautiful leather goods. And we've created jobs for thousands of other artisans across the globe, and also opportunity for thousands of primarily female impact entrepreneurs here in the United States. And now we are dreaming even bigger about growing that, about enabling women here to build lives and purposes that matter, and also creating community and opportunity for women across the globe, so that together we can ensure that every girl has the chance to learn and to lead. But make no mistake, all of that started with one microscopically very unimpressive dream. If you are feeling stuck, or scared, or overwhelmed, perhaps you're at a crossroads, or maybe you are leading people that do, I want to encourage you to give yourself permission, and those you lead, to dream small. Because our small dreams actually have a surprising power of catapulting us out of waiting and into creating. Okay, I obviously can't share all 14 principles with you today. So I'm going to jump to one of the last principles of Beginner's Pluck, because I believe, knowing what I know about this organization and this group of people, that I am in a room of people who are at a point where they're like, yeah, I think I want my life and my business and my leadership to matter, in the sense of like, I want to make the world a little better and brighter, not just for myself, but for those around me as well. This is specifically for you. I need you to know that no one wants or needs you to be their hero. Over the last decade of running this company in this like do-good space, I have become increasingly uncomfortable with this dichotomy that exists between like the do-gooders and the world changers and those they're benefiting. For me, it became very apparent when I showed up in Uganda as a 22-year-old who literally knew nothing and had nothing to offer, and yet somehow I was seen as this, like do-gooder, this giver, which I think meant that my Ugandan friends were supposed to assume the role of like grateful beneficiary. You guys know that is not how it works. The Lord created us to live in community with people that live across the street and across town and across the world. And community, real community, is when we do this sacred dance together, right? Of needing and being needed, of showing up and giving in times of receiving. In any time, in any relationship, when we get confused and we think our season or our circumstance is the permanent role that we or someone else is meant to play in relationship, we strip them, and ourselves, frankly, of the dignity of being these complex, dynamic, multifaceted human beings. Each and every one of us, terribly broken, but brilliantly bright. Speaking of heroes, I want to introduce you to a woman named Agnes. So I met Aggie just a few years into running Sseko. Aggie grew up in a village right outside of Kampala. And when she was 13 years old, a village elder who was her father's age approached him and offered him 20 cows in exchange for her hand in marriage, which, by the way, that was an enormous bride price for her village. And so everyone in the entire village was shocked when her dad said, who, by the way, was a single dad, #dad goals, when her dad said, like, nope, I'm going to keep her in school. So Aggie went on to high school. She ended up graduating from college. She was the first woman in her entire community to end up getting a university degree. So she goes out into the marketplace, and like a lot of students in Uganda, she can't find a job. She's looking for a job. When I met her, she had been looking for a job for 4 months. And at every single job she applied for, either she was completely overlooked because she was a female, or the male hiring manager said, like, yeah, I'll give you that opportunity in exchange for sex. So by the time I met her, she was pretty demoralized, and we were introduced by, a friend of a friend, and I met her, and she was incredible, but I was like, I'm so sorry. I literally, we are just barely staying alive here. We're, storing sandals in the bathtub and, barely breaking even, and I don't have any jobs for you. And she looked at me, and she just said, listen, let me work for you as an intern for 1 month, and I promise that I will drive value for this company. And that is the type of pluck that I cannot refuse. 7 years later, that plucky young woman is now the managing director of our entire company in Uganda, and she co-chairs the board with me. She has traveled across the entire continent, negotiating deals with our suppliers and doing quality for our raw materials. She's traveled to the United States, where she has spoken on stages and inspired hundreds of entrepreneurs, thousands, to lead lives and build businesses of impact and businesses that matter. Her impact is quite literally extending across the ocean, but what I want to tell you about is that back home, Aggie's village is changing. Okay, 10 years ago, according to Aggie, the average girl in her village was married off by the age of 13, sometimes as early as 8 or 9 years old. Less than 10 years later, the average 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old girl in her village is in school where she belongs. And that's because those young women and their family have seen through Aggie, through her story, what happens when a girl has the opportunity to learn and to lead. They've seen through Aggie what happens when you go to college and when you get a job and when you work your butt off. These young women will never know me, and that's okay because, frankly, I am not equipped to inspire and to move the needle in the way that Aggie can, because she has a story and a voice and a perspective that I simply don't. I mean, you want to talk about pluck. I'd say Aggie here is the patron saint of pluck. Here's the thing that we have to know. Truly transformational leadership, it's not about rising the ranks to success. It's not about achieving mastery or expertise or notoriety. It's about linking arms with others so that we can create a rising tide that truly lifts all ships. And when we as leaders and business owners and creatives and entrepreneurs, when we do the hard work of constantly diving back into the cycle of learning, back into that really scary, hard place of conscious incompetence, we will become more of who we were created to be. And that will light a path for others to do the same and to create their own unimaginable impact. When I was thinking about how to end this talk, it only felt appropriate to echo the wise words of the inspirational and well-respected figure, Emilio Estevez. Better known to some of us that were born in the 80s as Coach Gordon Bombay of the Mighty Ducks, who famously said, "Ducks fly together." But I think, of course, what he meant to say was plucks fly together. And just when you think they're gonna break apart, say it with me, plucks fly together. This guy's got it. And when the sky gets black and the wind blows hard, plucks fly together. And when everyone says it can't be done, plucks fly together. Stand up, you're in it. Plucks fly together. Thank you guys so much. Thank you. What an honor. Thank you. You're so sweet. Wow, you guys, you're amazing. Thank you. Such an honor to be here with you. We do have an event that is starting at 4 p.m. after this. I don't know where it's at. Someone else can tell you that. But for any of you, I would love to meet you in person, and I'll be signing books, and you can see our product and all kinds of fun stuff. Thank you so much for having me.